So, industrial policy, what I'm calling stupidity by another name. And really, the point here is that business and state need to be separated. The state does not know what the best business policies and best business opportunities should be. It's been discredited so many times, yet we're having this open conversation once again. And so I want to push against that to say it is still unfettered capitalism and competition and global cooperation and global competition, which makes the best solutions possible. And now more than ever, we need that kind of attitude. So what we have now is this zero-sum thinking. Whereas kind of post-World War II, we had this idea that, well, there could be cooperation and then there is benefit to all. The bar was raised for many, many people. So instead of thinking, well, if they're better off, I'm worse off, we can't have that. So I need to be better off. And if they're worse off, that's just fine, right? That's the new attitude. And we think about, let's say, several examples. Think about Germany and Japan after World War II. Well, it was that cooperative spirit that built them back into vibrant economies. And even in China, several hundred million people lifted out of poverty through their policies of openness and economic growth. And that capitalism created the value that essentially eliminated severe poverty in China. All of that thinking is now being changed. And now we're thinking that if you benefit, I lose. Bad idea. So the comparative advantage, cooperation, specialization into certain things that people do extremely well, regardless of what country or wherever they're geographically located, all of that is still a better policy. And yet we're pushing against that. We somehow think that having integrated circuits that are most advanced need to be built in the United States. Well, we just can't flip a switch and do that. These things take decades to develop the real capability needed. And you have, a Taiwan Semiconductor, which is very specialized in Taiwan, which is now a flashpoint. So now that's become very political. And so trying to build all that capability in the United States, we're going to waste tens of billions of dollars. We're not going to get there. And we were going to realize eventually that it was cooperation and some methodology for working together that would be better. But the idea that we can now have subsidies that'll just take care of the additional expense, right? We'll have restrictions that will then force business to be done within certain geographies, right? You can't have the best and the brightest anymore. You have to have US sourced materials, even batteries for electric vehicles. And the very legislation that dictates electric vehicles is misguided because I don't know if they're the best solutions and we don't have the charging stations or the infrastructure. They're very expensive, but we can't even get the batteries or have innovative battery technology because now that has to be US sourced based on the new legislation. This is the kind of silliness I'm speaking about. So now you have bureaucrats in control. So we've seen that legislation can now enable Congress to influence more than 60% of the market value of US companies. That's very dangerous. We do not want that kind of legislative influence. We want to have free competition. We want these companies to be free to create value. Value is defined as innovative products, innovative technologies, competition, enabling the best and the brightest products and services for the world, but certainly for US consumers as well. So those subsidies are going to waste value. I'll be very clear about that. We're going to waste a lot of the US budget on that. And instead, we can be creating value by just enabling the best players do their best jobs. Wherever they are in the world, let the people who are competing figure out what the best solutions are. Don't let government try to figure that out because even a handful of the smartest bureaucrats cannot outsmart the market, right? The market has got great wisdom that even a group of the most important geniuses in the world can't figure out, right? So now the unintended consequences of that kind of legislation. That's the thing that troubles me the most because you have political control and now they're dictating localized manufacturing. They're bringing this sense of fear and danger into the market. We're sort of being distracted by, TikTok is suddenly now a tool of the Chinese military. Really? I mean, have you seen TikTok? Really? Right? It's some sort of mind control. So you've got this social media influencing and really clouding judgment as to what can lie underneath and things that really matter, right? So we've got, what actually Chairman Xi in China has called the social media just fluff. And he's right, it's fluff. But that doesn't mean it needs to be legislated away. It doesn't mean that other things need to be legislatively encouraged. It just means that we need to let competition happen. And the one thing about social media, which is still bewildering to me, is, well, you can simply turn that off. I mean, it's not an essential utility that you need to use, right? But we do have things that are essential utilities for transportation and other things, but we still need to allow technology to take over and maybe make things a little bit more efficient, enable competition in areas, things like Uber and Lyft create a great competition for personal transportation. There are ways that society benefits greatly that we just cannot legislate, nor should we regulate how that innovation gets applied, right? And so we're being captured by a social media sideshow. We're losing track of what is truly a utility. Facebook's not a utility. Instagram's not a utility. We shouldn't care about that kind of communicative platform. What we should care about are the real utilities. We have energy issues. We have food issues. We have communications and transportation issues. Those are utilities that need attention, but somehow they're all being lumped into one category and therefore legislated and made inefficient at best. So what we're hearing, and the term I love is the signal versus the noise, right? So the signal is, truly what's happening. The noise is all the static around it. We are being captured by the static, right? And as Aldous Huxley has said, when everything's important, nothing's important, right? So we have really lost a sense of importance, of priority. We're having debates about things that are unimportant, things we can't do anything about, instead of focusing on enabling the entities, competitors, men and women who can really make a difference, just simply enabling them to make a difference wherever they are in the world. But now it's become far too political. So we need technology infrastructure. We need dramatic transformation because we have, software, artificial intelligence, life sciences, we have food scarcity, we have energy, we've got climate change that we need to address. All of these critical issues that are not getting the kinds of capital, intelligence, and freedom to compete and develop and innovate. It can't be legislated. And that's the big problem. We think we can legislate innovation. Just the opposite. When legislation gets in the way of innovation, we have something that's less than optimal at best. We have something that is inefficient, and we've really made our lives more dangerous by thinking that we're making them safer. That's the one thing that always happens. When we try to opt for safety, we end up really making ourselves much more vulnerable. And that's what we're doing. So when we try to be protectionist, what we're doing is we're creating danger. We're not enabling advancement, and we're not creating enough of a market that can create real innovation, right? So what's happening? We are losing motivation. What we want to do is enable the circumstances for people to be motivated to innovate. That really means staying out of the way. That doesn't mean managing. It doesn't mean controlling. It doesn't say, well, we're going to now have all chip innovation is now going to occur in the United States. So we're building a wall around the United States. Well, China's saying the same thing. We're going to innovate. We want, those kinds of advanced technologies here in China. So we're going to build a wall around that. Well, there's a lesson from the first emperor. The Great Wall of China didn't work then. It's a nice tourist attraction, but it doesn't have any real function. It failed. That wall failed, right? Walls fail. This wall will fail. The wall in China today is going to fail. The wall in the United States is going to fail. The wall in Western Europe is going to fail, right? They do not work, right? We have to allow for serendipity. We have to allow for the kinds of interactions and kinds of things that really can't be predicted. They can't be legislated, but we need to have freedom of capital. Capital needs to go where it is treated well, where it gets good return, where it can reinvest. And when we do that, we have the right environment to motivate, the right environment to innovate, and then we have the best outcomes. So these companies are real organizations. They're real people. They're not something that exists on a piece of paper that someone just declares, right? I remember, in China 20 years ago, they talked about, well, we're going to have advanced integrated circuit technology here in China. We're going to build our plants. We're going to, create these kinds of, innovations, and we'll own that market. Well, that didn't happen. Why? Because, well, real people need to do that. You need to have real people motivated to do that. And that motivation existed elsewhere. So that intelligence, for the most part, was in the United States and didn't want to go back to China and innovated in the United States, right? So When we in the United States take away that motivation, we are now taking away the ability to keep ahead of the world in these kinds of innovative technologies. That's a real mistake. Real people need to do real things, and that requires real freedom and access to capital on an unfettered basis. So success is only a few. So many try, very few succeed. And this is the history of all business. All business starts out, there may be many companies. We talked about this before. There were thousands of car companies in the 1910s and 20s. Well, it came down to 3 in the United States in the 1950s, right? Even today, large tech companies, right? They talk about, they're monopolies. Well, yeah, they are, because that's the natural process. When you're the best search engine, nobody uses number 2. When you're the best social media platform, nobody uses number 2. On and on and on, right? It's the natural process. When you are the best, you get the best people. You continue to make the best products at an increasing rate. People use your products more than others at an increasing rate. And even a slight advantage becomes a dominant position. And that's the real opportunity that just happens naturally. So now when legislation steps back and says, well, we don't like that. We want to have more companies. We want to share the wealth more evenly. Well, you're making a big mistake, because you can't do that. There's always a concentration of talent, and it's colleagues and talent and teams that create real value. And that real value can be captured on a global basis, and it can be extraordinary. So the successes create tremendous value. There are many failures, but the successes really do win the lottery, right? But that is the natural order of things, and we have to learn to accept that that's the outcome, because we get the best solutions when that is the outcome. So if we are legislating to try to get what we really want, we won't get what we really need, right? So what we need most times can't be predicted, right? So innovation creates all sorts of innovations that we didn't see coming, right? So when you even go back to the integrated circuit, all these opportunities, the microprocessor, all these things that created now the value that we have, you go back, and that really came from fundamental scientific breakthroughs. Well, we have the law of thermodynamics. Well, that created, heat and steam driven engines, which created an industrial revolution, right? Then when you have electromagnetism, right? The understanding of electromagnetism, well, you have electricity, and the electrical grid has created the modern society. You could not have predicted all of these things that would have happened when you had Maxwell Clerk's, formulas for electromagnetism. But trying to predict that would be the mistake, letting the market take these tools and use them, and then serendipity happens. Bright, intelligent people create interesting things. It's entrepreneurship, it's unfettered capital, and it's independence. I don't have to feed a government policy. I just see what the market needs and provide it. And a great example for that is Silicon Valley. And one of the things that people push against is the spark of innovation and then the sharing of wealth. Well, that happens in Silicon Valley. It's got a great spark of innovation, but wealth is shared because people own equity in all of these companies, right? So it's the best labor policy. So, the fact that you make this bright line distinction between management and labor in many large companies, that's an anachronism that really needs to go away, right? Because you then have these adversarial groups. When you're all working together, you should all be sharing the value of what gets created. That's for sure. That mechanism exists in technology companies and new innovative companies. Anachronistically, it does not exist in these old companies. And so there's policies that say, well, we need to have a labor board. We need to have supervisory council for labor and workers and all these things. That is inefficient. That's not a model that is sustainable in an environment. And, the automobile industry is a great example. The automobile industry now requires, a fundamental way to rethink a car, right? A car is now a software platform. Right? It used to be a mechanical engineering problem, and a very interesting one, and there were some wonderful mechanical engineers that created some wonderful products. Well, an electric vehicle is not that. An electric vehicle is software with electric motors, right? But it's a very different kind of solution to transportation. That requires innovative thinking. It also requires innovative structure, and legislation is anachronistic and is not going to help. All right, so at the end of the day, as we discuss, value is created by the consumer. Companies don't create value. Now, why is that important? Because whatever you want to legislate, people should make. If a consumer doesn't want it, it's not going to be valuable, right? Apple does not create value. Apple is valuable because it creates a product that people want, right? And even, the big bad companies, whether you want to call them, big tobacco, big oil, big whatever, right? Well, we want that product. Now, let's be clear, there's a lot of issues with how they've competed. There's a lot of other issues, and I am not naive to that. But at the end of the day, if nobody wanted to buy gasoline, we don't have big oil, right? So let's be clear. We as consumers create that value. We as consumers have the choice to create whatever products and technologies that we want to value. Those companies will survive. It's not in the legislation's hands, right? So again, you have this industrial policy saying, well, you need an electric vehicle. Well, maybe not. Maybe I want a hydrogen-powered vehicle. Maybe I want public transportation. Maybe I want to find, innovative ways to share automobiles that currently exist. There are ways to do that. And by the way, an electric vehicle is hardly a green solution to anything, right? But to legislate it is short-sighted. And that's one of many examples, right? So as I say here, brilliant bureaucrats can't equal the market, right? You don't know what really is the best solution, and it's the market that creates the value. It's not the companies, it's not the legislation, it's not directed policy, it's certainly not industrial policy. That creates inefficiency, it creates bloated networks, and you have the ideal bureaucracy as someone who can make choices without any consequences. When you give legislators the opportunity to create policy that has an impact on industry, an impact on entrepreneurs, an impact on companies and people, but they have no consequences for that. They can decide whatever, regardless of its inefficiency, and even if it causes innovation to decline, even if it causes companies to maybe go out of business or not take advantage of opportunities, they have no consequences. So that is always an environment for a bad decision. A good decision is made in a competitive environment because I've got consequences. If I don't get this right, it's been said recently, well, failure has consequences. Well, bureaucracy failure does not have consequences, right? You want to place all innovation and all business in an environment where there are consequences to bad decisions. When there are consequences to bad decisions, you have good decisions that win. And when good decisions win, we have the best environment for innovation and more creativity and solutions to the problems that really matter. And as I say, the law of unintended consequences has not been repealed, right? When we want to legislate and dictate, we will get solutions that are suboptimal, and we don't even know that. But those unintended consequences are very real, and we have to avoid that. And the only way to avoid that is to allow a market to be free, to separate state from industry. Industry needs to be independent to fail and to succeed, because success far outweighs the cost of the failures. So in summary, we now have zero-sum thinking. And I want to get us away from that idea of zero-sum thinking. Just because somebody else benefits, that doesn't mean you pay a cost. We were in an environment for decades where there was mutual benefit globally. And most of the world benefited from that environment. The United States far outweighed others in terms of benefit because we had the innovation, we had the freedom, we had the capital, we had the ability to create these things, and we're better off, but we served a global market, and that created a lot more value for the entire world. And now, we're seeing that being, let's say, diminished for sure, made much less efficient, and the long-term price can be far too high, right? So those are the unintended consequences of good intentions, right? So please don't have good intentions. Ronald Reagan was right. I'm here, I'm from the government, I'm here to help. That's the worst thing you could ever hear. Or as maybe Will Rogers said even better, Congress is in session and no one is safe, right? Don't mess with things. We have an environment that works very well. And it's like, let's use the sports example again, right? Well, take a football game. Okay, you've got rules, you've got referees, you've got sidelines, you've got goal lines. Let guys play. Don't have the referees call the plays, right? Let the players play and let the best teams win. You want to have rules and regulations. I'm not certainly, advocating the Wild West, but within that environment, let people compete because they will find the best solutions. And you're creating noise by enabling things that are far too unimportant become important. We just don't care about these things. They don't solve any problems. We've got to focus on the things that really matter, right? We have to enable an opportunity for people to be motivated to really achieve. We don't want to manage or control anything, right? We want to make sure we have the right laws in place, the right protections for sure, but we're not controlling competition. Few will win. We have to be comfortable with that. That's how the world works. People win the lottery. That's what happens. Meritocracy really matters. And the best and the brightest tend to win. There's certainly a component of luck, of timing, a lot of things that need to happen. But if you're not among the best, you will not win. And even if you are among the best, chances are you can fail still. But that combination is still the thing we need to enable and not try to interfere with, right? So let's focus on what we really need. We've got problems that need real solutions. We need innovation. We need new kinds of thinking. We're not going to get that with legislation. We're not going to get that by restricting competition. We're not going to get that by localizing things. We're not going to get that by fragmenting and requiring different sources and requiring people to think differently. We need to let them think the way they want to think, source what they need, compete the way they need, and ultimately create the most value. That is the way that we solve the most intractable, difficult problems that we face. And I'm alarmed because we think industrial policy will do that. It will not. It's failed before. It's created misery before. Does anyone not remember the Soviet Union? It made life miserable, right? And you take two great examples, Germany and Korea, East and West Germany, same culture, same attitude, same everything, except different economic institutions. Well, look at West Germany versus East Germany. People in East Germany were miserable and they had terrible products, on and on, right? And of course, North and South Korea, the example of different institutions impacting the same culture is very profound. People are better off with the best institutions that allow for the free movement of capital, the free movement of ideas, the free movement of people and competition. That's what we need. And when we create those opportunities, then it is the people, the consumers, who really create the value, right? That's the thing to understand. If you're solving a problem and people need that solution, you're going to capture a lot of value that you've just created. We have to enable that more than anything. Industrial policy will not do that. It is stupidity. And I'm here to rail against that and to enable an environment where people compete for the best solutions that appeal to consumers, whoever those consumers are. That will create the most value and still be the best solution.